past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom.
That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox. And a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to. But the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling. You take him for a friend.
Wow, he included Vouch right there. Awesome.
Rolling. Okay, let's go. Over the past 5 months, just about everyone I know has come to the same conclusion. Dyed-in-the-wool liberals are as much the enemy of normal, decent people as conservatives are. And when I say liberal, I don't mean your average Joe who likes Harry Potter and Marvel movies and doesn't really think about politics outside of election years.
Will you shut up, man?
I mean the people who love Harry Potter and Marvel movies and also go out of their way to scold Palestinians for resisting their own extermination. People who demand you condemn Hamas while refusing to acknowledge that history didn't begin on October 7th. People who split their time evenly between rewatching...
Now, what have we noticed? I'm going to stop it here on this part. Because what have we noticed from a lot of progressives, like Dr. Cornel West, like Crystal Ball? They all have a condemnation for Hamas. But then you have radicals like Ajamu, like Margaret Kimberly. And dare to say, I don't know if Scott Ritter is a radical, but on here, on our network, he doesn't view Hamas as a terrorist organization, neither do we. And he views them just in line with international law, which is if you're being occupied, according to international law, you can resist your occupier, including armed resistance. But just like, and I'm using liberal and progressive interchangeable. So you hear them say liberal in the video and in Martin Luther King and MLK. But to me, the updated name for that person is progressive. Now, there are some people who would call themselves liberals. That's really like an old school sort of term. You don't really see people maybe under 40 kind of use the term liberal to self-describe. That's usually because that's a term more of liberals is like liberals kind of meant what progressives used to mean during the first the first Bernie campaign in 2015. Liberals of the 70s was sort of the progressives of that era. They were kind of on the same wavelength. I would say that progressives have regressed since the first Bernie campaign. I think the progressive Democrats have regressed. I mean, just look at what's his name, the guy who just got elected, Max Frost. Now, shouldn't the new squad members that are being elected, shouldn't they be to the left of AOC, Jamal Bowman? But it seems like AOC in that class was the most radical. They're not radical, but they were the most radical. And then the class that came after them, the Cori Bushes, especially the Jamal Bowmans, they sold out very quickly. Then Max Frost sold out quicker than anyone. I did a stream on this. So to the point that I'm making, progressives are moving backwards. They're regressing. Let's get back to the video. He makes a lot of good points. I'll be stopping and starting here and there.
Watching Hamilton and calling anyone who criticizes Joe Biden a Russian troll or a Chinese spy. I think you know the type. But just so we're on the same page before we go any further, let me be extra clear. Liberalism is the default ideology in the imperial core. The average person ends up with a liberal perspective by osmosis. There is a pipeline from simply existing in the empire to becoming a rabid servant of the empire. And if you feel like this is an attack on you personally,
a rabid servant of the empire, isn't that what you would describe Bernie Sanders? Isn't that what you would describe AOC's Ro Khanna? This is why I put progressives in the same category as what they're using as to refer to as liberals. And in this context, he actually could be also including them in this dynamic, but choosing to use liberal.
Personally, please don't feel that way. Everyone should be capable of changing their perspective when presented with new
evidence. And to the point I just made about him meaning the same thing, he does. And because look who he showed in the edit. He showed AOC, he showed Bernie Sanders when they were in the part of the video where it was Malcolm X's voice, but you saw Bernie Sanders, AOC flash on the screen.
New evidence. If you're not, that's a good sign you may have been indoctrinated into a dangerous ideology. But that's what this video is about. I'm going to give you just a little bit of evidence that Western liberals are a tremendous force for evil. And contrary to what they want you to believe, they absolutely do not care about truth, justice, peace, or progress. Let's start with the civil rights era. A lot of Americans today erroneously believe that when Dr. King came onto the scene, he magically opened everyone's eyes and ended racism. Sure, things were bad back then, but his words were so moving that everyone put down their pitchforks and agreed that we were all equal. And of course, the white liberals were marching hand in hand with black Americans to forge a path to a brighter future. While MLK did have a profound way with words, and there were indeed a number of white Americans who marched for equal rights, this simplified view of the civil rights era is exceptionally misleading. Martin Luther King is one of the most co-opted figures in modern history. Everyone tries to claim him for their particular set of beliefs. I made a whole video about how history whitewashes black radicals. But the thing about these people waxing poetic about how great King was is that 90% of the time, they would have hated the man had they lived in the same era. Think about your family members today and how they reacted to the Black Lives Matter rallies and protests. If they're anything like my family, you probably heard some pretty ignorant, hateful statements. The same exact thing happened in Dr. King's time. Police brutality, rampant racism, and constant attempts to misconstrue what the movement was really about. The thing that always concretizes that fact for me is this comic, by the white moderate cartoonist Charles Brooks. King talking to a reporter with the city destroyed in the background and some white people lying on the ground. And King saying, I plan to lead another in this
comic, the city is destroyed and white people are on the ground. We've all seen the footage of hoses and dogs being sick, but this comic wants to put white people on the ground in his drawing. It's amazing.
Nonviolent march tomorrow. This is exactly what we see today. Liberals get uncomfortable and suddenly they're not for equal rights anymore. Or more accurately, they still say they are, but they just have some concerns about optics. That's not how you're supposed to protest. Why can't everyone just protest peacefully?
Isn't that what AOC is saying? A certain way to protest, especially when you're protesting her.
Why? So you can ignore it? The entire point of protest is to be disruptive. But even if we put that aside, no one wants to have to protest. They want things to change with as little friction as possible. But that's just not how things work when the oppressor class likes their position, and that position is dependent upon subjugating another class. It's like Castro said during the Cuban Revolution.
That's really the point to make against sort of progressives and liberals. The idea that an empire that's willing to kill 500,000 Iraqi kids, an empire that's willing to fund a genocide, but progressives want us to believe that all they have to do is play nice with these genocidal maniacs, and then we'll get health care. It is so illogical. It's amazing that's coming from the professional managerial class. Let's continue.
The people did not choose the path of armed struggle. It was the path that was forced upon them. Same with Palestine. The number of tweets I've seen from liberals saying, I don't understand why they can't just peacefully protest, is insane. And every single time, someone claps back with a different instance of Palestinians peacefully organizing and being killed all the same. By the time King penned his letter from Birmingham jail, which you heard some of at the beginning of this video, he had become disenchanted with white northern liberals, who had earlier in his career been his greatest source of white support. But when King started talking about systemic issues that intersected with racism, such as economic inequality, these liberals started to squirm.
Now, when we start talking about wiping the state of Israel off the map, then progressive. I just don't want the people who are being occupied and oppressed to die from bombs. I still want the same system in place. I'm trying not to stop it so much. This video was triggering when I watched
jail, which you heard some of at the beginning of this video, he had become disenchanted with white northern liberals, who had earlier in his career been his greatest source of white support. But when King started talking about systemic issues that intersected with racism, such as economic inequality, these liberals started to squirm. The comfortable whites who looked down on the southern yokels for their ignorance and racism were now in the hot seat themselves. They benefited from a two-tiered society in which liberal elites were at the top.
Now, is this not the description of Dr. Cornel West? Willing to do critiques, but not to go too far, because he benefits from the structure that's already in place. Same with the crystal balls and the breaking points. Same with the Sam Cedars and the majority reports. Same with the Cenk Uygurs and the TYTs. The police state is a perfect example of that. When we start talking about defund the police, AOC, I don't know, Bernie Sanders, well. They're part of the class that believes the police state keeps all the pores away from us. Let's continue. I think I need to replace the battery in my mouse. It's slowing down here.
And so the complaint about optics was born. Look, Dr. King, we support your ideals, but the way you're protesting just isn't okay. This is the way liberals operate. They support emancipation movements in theory, but as soon as it crosses into the realm of the material, they become no different than conservatives.
Let's apply this to the election, and I'm going to replay it. So as I replay this last maybe 20 seconds of what he says, apply that the way that I said.
It just isn't okay. This is the way liberals operate. They support emancipation movements in theory, but as soon as it crosses into the realm of the material, they become no different than conservatives.
They become no different than conservatives. Now, I can apply this to so many things. What sticks out to me about liberals, progressives, sort of falling in line with the establishment talking point that is very right-wing, it's immigration. And we're going to get to that. When Joe Biden uses the term illegals. But anyway, so that I don't get on a tangent, and because we're maybe 30% through the video, let's play some more.
If violent protest is illegal, and nonviolent protest gets your liberal supposed supporters to condemn your movement, what recourse do you have to effect change? There's a reason imperial core countries are actively trying to criminalize various forms of protest.
Think about that. How do we affect change? How do we affect change through this system, through the two parties? Let's do it that way. How do we affect change through the two parties? What have progressives decided to do? Team up with one of the capitalist parties, and are they delivering on promises? Are they delivering on progressive policies?
Supporters to condemn your movement, what recourse do you have to affect change?
What recourse do you have to affect change outside of the Democratic Party? That's essentially, actually, I'm going to let him make the point because I'm jumping ahead. So let him make the point, and then I'll say.
There's a reason imperial core countries are actively trying to criminalize various forms of protest. They have a vested interest in things remaining the same. As Kwame Ture said in his 1969 book, The Pitfalls of Liberalism, what a liberal really wants is to bring about change which will not in any way endanger his position. That is, of course, impossible when we're talking about fixing the system.
Wants to bring about change without endangering his position. Dr. Cornel West wants to bring the U.S. empire down, but doesn't want to run in the Green Party and be on 40-plus ballots because he's going to get all of his PMC class attacking him. He won't be invited to luncheons. He won't be invited to corporate media to talk about the empire, to chummy it up with Anderson Cooper.
Said in his 1969 book, The Pitfalls of Liberalism, what a liberal really wants is to bring about change which will not in any way endanger his position. That is, of course, impossible when we're talking about fixing the systemic problems of racism, imperialism, and economic inequality. According to a 1966 Harris poll, King's favorable rating among white Americans was just 27%. Compare that to 95% today. That's how liberals operate.
Like that? 25% when he's actively doing the stuff, meaning the civil rights movement, all the protests, 25%. But now, those same people who was giving him 25%, who a lot of them are still alive, because he could possibly be still alive or at the end of life at this moment. So who are still alive, now he has 95% magically. Same with Muhammad Ali. They hated his guts. But now you would think that they've been loving him ever since he was called Cassius Clay.
They oppose any attempts at emancipation while they're happening, then pretend they were always on the side of the righteous when they have the benefit of history books telling them who the good guys were. There's a great tweet that really sums up this liberal tendency. A liberal is someone who opposes every war except the current war and supports all civil rights movements except the one going on right now.
That is exactly, that's very similar to what I said in a Nick and CJ stream, is that, and this was in the context of talking about Marianne Williamson. I said the same thing. Liberals, and at that time I was calling her a liberal, but progressive liberal, whatever you want to call it, liberals are never against the current war. They're always against past wars that have already ended, or wars that public sentiment has flipped. Like they're in the rear view. They might not be the newest war, but they're in the rear view. Those are the ones that they feel comfortable with coming out against the establishment. Now that everybody's saying Iraq war was terrible, now they're coming out and saying it. But I remember during that time, I was working for AT&T, and I was on the side not buying invading Iraq. I could not mention it. My boss at the AT&T store, I remember it was all guys that worked at this, it was like 10 of us. He would walk around watching news and saying, yeah, these fucking people, if you don't support the Iraq war, get the fuck out of this country. You thought I was going to say something to him? You thought I was going to bring up my position at that time? But now everybody knows the Iraq war is bad now somehow. This is what liberals do. Progressives.
There's a great tweet that really sums up this liberal tendency. A liberal is someone who opposes every war except the current war and supports all civil rights movements except the one going on right now. Now, while MLK was outspoken in his disappointment with white liberals, Malcolm X went to critical steps.
And let me give you an example of what he's saying here. Support the current, but not the past. I just forgot what I was going to say. Let me see if I can get it back.
Further, and correctly labeled them an enemy of genuine progress and liberation. The conservatives are wolves. You know what they're up to. They're evil and they're honest. Not because they care about being honest, but because they're not afraid to wield power when they have it. The liberal is a fox. Less outwardly threatening, even seemingly approachable, but still a predator. A conservative will usually be open about their racism and how they need to keep the dirty foreigners out. Whereas a liberal will say things like, I see you, I hear you, hate has no place here.
What does that even mean? And this is what liberals, they're very good at saying a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't say anything. I see you, I hear you, hate has no place here. You tell me, what does that mean?
And then they'll run campaign ads about how conservatives are failing to secure the southern border. But
he said, they say I'm with the immigrants. I'm with the dreamers. Now he's talking about getting rid of asylum. Now he's calling undocumented illegals. That's Joe Biden. And then AOC, Bernie Sanders, and all the other progressives fall right in line, not saying anything about the progressive policies, mildly, possibly mildly critiquing it in a social media post. But let's continue.
Biden hasn't stopped building Trump's wall. That should tell you everything you need to know about the liberal approach to immigration. Pretend you're deeply concerned, and then do the same thing the conservatives are doing. Or take the genocide in Gaza. We've seen a handful of the more liberal Democrats speak out against what Israel is doing, which is no small feat for a politician in the United States. But then when push comes to shove, they do the evil thing anyway. As I'm writing this script, every single Senate Democrat just voted to continue funding the genocide in Gaza. Every single one. It's like the meme. The people on the receiving end of US militarism don't care whether the people who sent the bombs are deeply concerned about it. They're still sending the bombs. Socialists like me tend to joke about Democrats just being Republicans with a rainbow flag painted on their bombers.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely true. The liberals' only objection to imperialism and global domination is on aesthetic grounds. They may say they're cool with gay people, but they're still going to turn the rest of the world to glass if it means maintaining our hegemony.
So this is a great point that he's making. Who have Nick and I said the Bernie Sanders industrial complex are willing to throw under the bus? Before this genocide, we said that. They're willing to throw Palestinians under the bus in order to sit at the kids' table in the Democratic Party. What they're willing to sell out. They'll sell you out in the police state. They did that. I'll rewind it slightly and continue.
Still sending the bombs. Socialists like me tend to joke about Democrats just being Republicans with a rainbow flag painted on their bombs. That's who they are. But it's absolutely true. The liberals' only objection to imperialism and global domination is on aesthetic grounds. They may say they're cool with gay people, but they're still going to turn the rest of the world to glass if it means maintaining our hegemony. A good example of this meaningless
Listen to this about For Real.
When Pharrell recently sent Trump a cease and desist to stop Trump from using his songs at rallies. And then he turned around and performed at a fundraising gala for the IDF. The people who killed 11...
So he sends a cease and desist, not to play the song "Cause I'm Happy," that song. But then he performs at an IDF event. Oh God, these people are just terrible people.
11,000 children in the past few months, who have targeted doctors saving injured people, journalists trying to show the world what's happening, the people who blindfolded a man, told him to run, and then sniped him in the back of the head. Okay, celebrities being useless is one thing, but when you have a liberal world leader, that's when things get really dangerous. Take Trudeau, for example. In response to one of the many ongoing protests for Palestine in Canada, on February 13th, he posted the following on Twitter. The demonstration at Mount Sinai Hospital yesterday was reprehensible. Hospitals are places for treatment and care, not protest and intimidation. I strongly condemn this display of anti-Semitism. In Toronto and across Canada, we stand with Jewish communities against this hate. This is insane. If you've been online at all in the last 5 months, you'll know where I'm going with this. Justin Trudeau, liberal darling, has supported to the hilt the Israeli apartheid regime, which has bombed every single hospital in Gaza out of operation. Not only that, these monsters also dressed as doctors and nurses and infiltrated a hospital to shoot and terrorize the patients and heroic staff inside. To the liberal, walking outside a hospital and demanding justice is a bridge too far. But butchering an entire population because it serves the interest of capital is perfectly acceptable. The justification for statements like Trudeau's has always been opposing anti-Semitism. That obviously doesn't work anymore. It's an absurd claim to make that criticizing a genocidal apartheid regime is anti-Semitic. And it's become even more clearly absurd now that we've seen hundreds of thousands of Jewish people around the world stand up against Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign and say, "You do not represent us." All you have to do is look at footage from within Israel itself. Jews are brutalized by the fascist police for daring to speak out against the regime. The anti-Semitism charge obviously doesn't work anymore. So the liberals have fallen back on what they do best, weaponizing vague feelings. The main objection to rallies for Palestine now is that it makes people feel uncomfortable or unsafe on college campuses in the West. Here's an example that's been making the rounds online.
We want him dead. Please end it, please.
Aside from the fact that those are the most obvious fake tears you've ever seen, I want you to think about the absurdity of this display. Claiming to feel unsafe in your insular little university versus this.
مين بدك مين بدك؟ امي مع اخويا. طيب انت ايش؟ اخويا، ابو نسرة كمان.
This shit is so fucking hard for me to watch what's happening to these kids. This little boy who is very close in my youngest age, having to take care of his other siblings because of what's happening here. So I'm going to slightly move it back so you can see. This is fucking terrible. You see, he's kicking care of another sibling right here. Oh, God.
That's what unsafe looks like. You feel uncomfortable? Think about how uncomfortable it is to have no food or clean water, no shelter, no hygiene products, your family killed, the places you've been told will be safe purposefully targeted with bombing runs. Liberals have no right to cry crocodile tears and pretend to feel unsafe. Of course, they'll still do it, and sometimes it will work. There are very few weapons as dangerous as a white woman's tears, as minorities have learned the hard way throughout history. Enough pretend fear and they get what they want. In this case, the criminalizing of solidarity with the people currently being exterminated. I made a tweet the other day that said, "One thing that's been bothering me recently is that I have no power to make liberals care. I can say, I will never again speak to someone who still supports Israel, but what good is that? The hate and powerlessness I feel is something I haven't experienced before." I had one commenter respond with something I think is important to share. This is how colonized people have felt forever. Liberals act like they care, but they don't. They really, really don't. And their fake performative caring actually makes it way worse. At least right-wingers are honest. That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it echoes what Malcolm X said half a century ago. Liberals are no better.
It makes it way worse. Similar to what Jimmy Dore said. It's worse to think you have somebody on the inside fighting for you who is just part of the establishment, i.e. AOC Bernie Sanders. How's that Medicare for all going with AOC? Yet she's fine with funding the Iron Dome now. But she's progressive.
Than conservatives. They're often even more bloodthirsty, as we've seen with their recent behavior. The only thing that separates a liberal servant of empire from a conservative one is that the liberal will lie through their teeth to make it seem like they're on your side.
Liberals will lie through their teeth to make it seem like they're on your side.